And obviously, wherever tourism happens, you're strengthening the local market. We're kind of tight for time, so I won't go through that diagram, but if we can move on to the next one, please. I think Mexico has done, you jumped one. Oops. Mexico has done a good job in terms of tourism. It understands that it has to work closely with the private sector. However, there are certain components, such as infrastructure, that can only be built by the government. In other words, the government, like in so many things, has to plant a seed, and if the government plants the seed, everything else will happen if they do the right, they develop the right formula with the private sector. Here you see Mexico before the 70s had what I called tourism by accident. Destinations like Acapulco, Mazatlan, some of you might know these places, became very fashionable because there were beautiful locations, but non-sustainable development happened there. There wasn't a plan, there wasn't a long-term view, and those places, frankly, have very bad history right now, very low occupancy. It's not a good place. No more flights go there. However, in the 70s, the Central Bank of Mexico realized that we had to go to new areas of Mexico. We had to populate the country. Mexico was highly centralized in Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. And so they went to other places in Mexico, and I'll talk about a very specific example. But they created a Ministry of Tourism that would take care of the political side of tourism. Where does it have to go? What happens between the states? What happens between countries? It created Fonatur, the agency that I was lucky enough to head in Mr. Fox's administration, which created all of the infrastructure, financed the first hotels, built all of that original infrastructure. And recently, we had Mexico's Tourism Promotion Board created about 5 years ago, which spends $180 million, which comes from a plane. Every time you fly into Mexico, you're paying $15, you don't know you're paying, to get into Mexico. And all of that is used to promote Mexico at a time that is very challenging for Mexico. Bancomex, which is Mexico's export bank, currently is financing hotels because the government of Mexico understands that hotels and tourism are one of the greatest forms of export you can have. There's a lot of debate in Mexico as to who brings the greatest number of foreign revenues to Mexico. Is it oil, is it remittances, or is it tourism? Oil is as much as getting rid of your natural resources, selling crude oil out is non-productive. It's a bad idea. Remittances, I think, are the shame of countries. When you cannot produce enough jobs locally, your people have to go elsewhere and send remittances in, and the case between Mexico and the US is enormous. But tourism, which is the #3 provider of foreign revenue for Mexico, is something we do in Mexico, by Mexicans, for Mexicans, because we're good at it. How am I doing for time there?
Close to wrap-up time.
Okay. Very quickly, Cancun. Next one, please. Cancun was created in the original concept is 1975. There was a village of 200 fishermen. Does anybody know Cancun? Okay, there was a village of 200 people there. Now there's a town, or several towns, 1.3 million inhabitants. Fourth largest GDP per capita, and this is, I mean, the miracles that happen in China we're not as spectacular because we're not as big, but fourth GDP per capita, highest growth rate, and the only reason for Cancun happening as it has happened has to do with nothing else but tourism. There are no fishermen. There are no, there's nothing there that is not somehow related to providing for the tourists, for the 10 million tourists that visit this place on an annual basis. Just to close, if we can put the nice picture, and having skipped a lot here, I would say that we, in spite of the fact that Mexico is good at tourism, it's number 9 worldwide in terms of receipts, we have only barely touched the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to do in Mexico right now. We have to address new markets. We have to address new products. We have to improve on promotion. And obviously, with the war against drugs right now, we have an enormous challenge as to how do you make people feel comfortable in Mexico when everything that is happening, and it has to do with better communication. Thank you very much.
John, thank you very much for that, and sorry for cutting you off at the end there. Secretary Hussain of Bangladesh, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I really feel honored for getting this opportunity to talk before you. I'm grateful to ITC for inviting me to come here, all the way from Bangladesh. You know, Bangladesh is an LDC. I'm going to share with you today the experience of Bangladesh as an LDC while adopting to the policy of export-led growth strategy. LDC as a group has a concentration of about 11% world population. On the other hand, the share of this group to the total world trade is only 1%, and to that of services is less than 0.5%. Given this scenario, there has been a question among the members of this group whether an export-led growth strategy can serve the purposes of development. I mean to feed the people who are living below the poverty line, create employment, generate income, and so on. The question is whether this strategy is sustainable in the long run. Well, we are inspired by the experiences of 4 tigers of Asia, and of late, the growth of China. Let me share the export growth of Bangladesh during the last about 40 years, since independence in the year 1991. During the first 2 decades, Bangladesh has been pursuing an import substitution policy. And the growth of export was during this period. In 1972, it was roughly 360 million. And by 1991, it was about 1.7 billion. So in terms of amount, it's a big growth, you can say. But immediate after adopting to the export-led growth strategy for creation of employment and generation of income, there has been a big rise in export income. By 2001, the growth was about $7 billion. The export income was about $7 billion. And last year it was more than $16 billion. As against this, of course, we have a deficit balance of payment, balance of trade.